So in keeping with our movement principles of the past weeks and the work of Bartenieff, Laban Bartenieff Movement System, today's emphasis will be on patterns of crawling. And I'm using crawling as the larger container through which to explore the developmental patterns. And so we'll be working with the different patterns of connection largely through the skeletal system, but of course, muscles and tendons and fluids are all connected to bones. And so we'll be visiting some of these different patterns and playing with different ways of traveling a little bit on the floor and working our way from a very low level. I'm going to build it in a very sort of systematic way where we'll visit some patterns of connection. And then we'll explore them in a kind of progression. So head, tail, well, we'll start with some core-distal connections and then go to head, tail, upper, lower, body half and cross-lateral. And we'll keep going through that kind of phrase. And we'll explore really low to the ground, really low level stuff. And then more sitting, tabletop, kind of mid-level. And then more mid-level to standing. And then standing, and then going sort of back and forth and in between. So that's pretty much where we're going and what we're doing. If anything hurts, don't do it. If anything's very confusing, ask me a question. For now, let's take the time to find a bit of stretching, reaching, wriggling, breathing into the spaces in your body. Taking a couple of moments for yourself. Noticing where your sensation of your body is at today. It's November in the UK, it's quite chilly already, it's a bit damp. And I think always the weather affects my mood as well as my joints. So just acknowledging where we're at relative to the phrase of the seasons. Feel free to give hands a rub, applying a bit of contact, tapping, holding, palpating, stroking, something that makes contact with your body. Noticing skin. And as you're making contact with different parts of your body, you can feel when skin becomes bone. Noticing this change of density of your body. How this skeletal architecture has all these curves and points and disappearances into the soft tissues of your body. And you might be lying down, you still might be sitting or standing or walking, doesn't matter. You're welcome to work wherever you wish. I'll guide us to be more in one orientation to gravity later, but even then, if you want to change it, you're very welcome. And so feeling into the bones, different bones, you might become fascinated just with one part for a little while. You might follow the line of a journey of bones. And remembering that bones are fluid, well, have a fluid core, and that the diagrams we might look at are a little bit deceptively still. And actually there's a lot of life force in bones. Blood is made there. Great, so let's begin with a heel rock. So lying down, finding legs long underneath sitting bones, finding a flexion and extension at the ankle joints, and finding that rock traveling through the whole of your skeleton, from the heels, through the lengths of the legs, into the pelvis, into spine, through up into the skull. Feel free to let the breath go with an audible sigh, and you're welcome also, if you wish, to take a hiss through the mouth, extending the exhalation as you give the bones a little jiggle, rocking it, using the bones, or using the ankle bones, heel bones, to make this pivot happen. And if you feel like your feet are sliding on the floor and you're not going anywhere, see what happens if you anchor the weight of the bones a little bit more into the ground, as if you're digging holes in the sand. Noticing where in your body is moving, where maybe any holding could just start to join in. Activating this vertical throughness of the spinal core. Heels through tail, allowing each vertebrae to wake up. And if you need to pause at any time, go ahead and pause. If you want to keep going a little bit longer, do so. If you pause, you can allow the legs to be heavy. And then finding a sigh to reinitiate. If you were here last week, we were phrasing our flow and paying attention to the initiation and the resolution of movements. And now we're going more into the kind of flow of the center of the movement itself, allowing this heel rock to just keep going. And then eventually, let's all take a pause. And notice simply what a bit of heel rocking has offered to your sensation. Okay. So head-tail connection, the relationship between the skull and the tailbone. And the connection through between these two distal ends of the spine. So maybe bend your knees to the supine hook position, feet can be flat on the ground. And let's play a little bit with the skull and the tailbone, easing towards each other, compressing the curves of the neck and of the lower back. And you may wish to take your skull off the ground a little bit to come towards pubic symphysis, and then putting it back down again, but that might be more large and dramatic than you'd like to do, and in which case you can keep it much smaller. Having a sense of head and tail, finding a condensing in the front. And then you can also explore the other way, head and tail coming towards each other, but more in the back. So finding more of an arch of the spine. And again, it doesn't need to be huge, but allowing the lumbar curve and the cervical curve, the spine, the neck, the lower back, to increase that arch, sticking chest forward. I mean, you might want to go all the way up onto the back of the skull, but that might be huge and not so attractive, so don't bother if it feels uncomfortable. If you are taking a larger movement, don't get stuck anywhere. Keep it moving. And then you can alternate. Playing a little bit with the scale. Doesn't have to be huge. Simply a little tuck of the chin. A lifting of chin can be enough information to activate this connection of head and tail. And then find spine somewhere back in the middle. And let's play with, this time, head and tail coming towards each other more in the side. So I've got a lateral flexion going on. And my head and tail moving towards each other in the side space is causing one side of my vertebrae to condense and the other to be more open. And my arms and my legs are kind of, well, my arms are coming along as I move, and my feet are quite planted. I don't really feel like I'm pushing from my feet, but there's definitely some change of their contact. A little bit. And so it's like wagging your tail and wagging head towards tail. And if you're on carpet, it might not be so easy to slide. And if you're on wood, hopefully you've got a bit more glide there. And again, it doesn't have to be huge. You can see what it would feel like at a smaller range. Great. Well, that's our bit of head-tail connection with a bit of side-sidedness. And then bring spine back into the center. Give yourself a little wriggle. And then let's take knees to one side. Feet can stay roughly where they are. They don't need to change where they are on the ground. Knees can go in one direction. Head can go in the other direction. Noticing how the spine now has found more of a rotation. From navel center to knees. And from navel center through torso up into skull, the other direction. And then reversing, knees come back up, skull comes to the middle, and then going to the other side. Sensing how pubic symphysis and tail facing in a different direction to where skull is. And then reversing that journey, soles of feet finding the floor as the skull comes up. And in your own time, carrying the knees and the skull in opposite directions. Allowing tailbone to come off the ground a little bit. Shifting across the back of sacrum. And noticing as you take this movement that the spine has this rotation, this twist. Okay. And then bringing yourself onto all fours. And let's find those three movements here on all fours. So we have a rounding the spine, head, tail can mobilize towards in the front and in the back space. Head, tail can find side-sidedness, coming towards each other through the side space. And then you can find a rotation now. How are we going to do that on all fours? So maybe taking, what have I got there? So I've got a little shift and an opening of one knee. Shifting to the other side. And coming onto one shin. Tail is leading, and then I can see what my upper spine and my skull want to do. Maybe I can keep them looking at the ground. Or maybe I can allow upper spine and skull to come with me. And I return. Or I could find an arm opening, a little thread through that gap. So more of the upper part of the spine finding some rotation. And maybe you know this exercise from other kinds of classes, but see if you can taste it for the first time with a sense of that rotation being very easy that you found on your back. And it's not about pausing anywhere, but more about mobilizing this rotation, head-tail connection. So even as the upper part of the spine, you can swap sides, even as the upper part of the spine from the rib cage through to skull is more active, noticing what happens with your tailbone as you take this opening on one side and this threading through. And you feel this conversation through the whole spine. Okay. Coming back to the center. And then in your own way, go ahead and explore the connection between your head and your tail, however you wish. You might stay quite low to the ground, or you might come into sitting. You may wish to place a hand on your head and on your sacrum to feel the relationship between these two parts, these two ends. And again, it doesn't need to be huge. Just coming into an awareness of these ends of the spine and all the possibility of movement in between. Okay. Let's bring this spine to lay back down on the floor. And finding a big X shape with legs and arms. Doesn't need to be terribly wide, but a bit wider than parallel. And let's take the whole of the spine with this lateral flexion and sagittal flexion to roll into a small ball. And then using the flow of an inhale to unwind, open out legs and arms. And see if the hands and the feet can arrive as you arrive in a small ball. Spine opening, and as spine arrives, hands and feet arrive. Head, tail, hands and feet arriving close to the navel center at the same time. And then coordinating this core-distal connection or radial symmetry. Right and left a few times, exhaling to condense. Inhaling to feel the whole of you spreading on the floor. Elbows and knees soften, spine condenses. So this sense of spinal core radiating through into the hands and the feet, through the legs and the arms. And we can imagine that connection of hands and feet through arms and legs, traveling really into the whole spine, but maybe towards the navel center. Inhaling to spread, exhaling to condense. finding two ends of the spine, coordinating with hands and feet. And you can explore, if you wish, opening onto the side. And also, if you wish, opening onto your front surface. And maybe some images come to you. The most common here is thinking about a starfish, or rather a six-limbed starfish, because we can include the tail as well as the head. And play for yourself with some core-distal coordination. Maybe head, tail, hands and feet come off the ground a little bit. Or maybe you find yourself in a small ball on your shins. And you might wish to imagine a colour of your starfish or a particular environment. Enjoying this folding and unfolding. Remembering the liquidity of the bones. So each limb is equal in the spine, from the navel center to the skull and navel center to the tail, also equal in its articulation, extension, flexion. And let's activate a little bit more the lower body, so feet, tail relationship. I'm going to play a little bit on my front to find tailbone and feet coming towards navel center, underlying supportive head-tail connection to make that a little easier. So my upper body is supporting my lower body coming in and extending. So I'm finding a differentiation between the lower body and the upper body. And the upper body, navel center to head and to hands. But staying with this lower part of this beautiful starfish, you can play a little bit with maybe extending both feet, both knees simultaneously, and finding a rock. So it's slowed down. This action is drawing my feet towards pelvis and sending them away. And I can keep it very neat and clear and underneath my sitting bones if I wanted to. Or I can add a little bit more accent to the extension to feel my lower body mobilizing in a slightly different way, with a little bit more momentum. Or I could really indulge in that flexion by bringing my knees really up towards my head. And I don't know about you, but I'm managing to travel already. So here is one of our very low level body connectivity propulsions. I'm going to hit the wall in a minute. So, lower body active, upper body kind of passive, going along with it. My head is definitely rolling from one side to the other side because the information is traveling through my spine, but I'm not deliberately doing anything with the upper body. So by placing the emphasis on the extension or on the rebound of the flexion, you might end up with a little traveling towards tailbone. Kicking your aloe vera along the way. And then in your own way, playing with a connection of lower body to upper body. So what might that be? Lower body leading, upper body following. Lower body leading, upper body following. Lower body leading, upper body coming with. So I'm trying to keep reinitiating from my heels and my tailbone. That might be sliding on the floor. It might be sending that whole unit into the air. Jumping upwards with the lower body leading. I didn't do that for a long time. You might be pressing lower body into the ground to find a extension through spine. You might be pushing onto the wall to find a journey away from the wall. And then at a certain point, you can start activating upper body a little bit more to be more directed. So head, hands, eyes, fingertips, head to navel center. This relationship of the arms and the spine flexing and extending. Where might this take you? Pushing into the ground, maybe finding a surface to push into. And feeling the underlying support of your head-tail connection as the clarity through hands, elbows, shoulder blades comes into play. You might find this rolling we did last week if you were here, where the upper body leads, head and hands lead and the lower body follows. Or you might find yourself in a more familiar shape like a downward dog or a hands and knees position. If you're in downward dog, you can bend your knees and play a little bit with sending hands first and feet following. Hands towards feet, feet towards hands. What's possible there? Or maybe on the lower level, pressing into the ground, dragging yourself forward. It's quite hard to push. It's easier to go backwards pushing through the hands than it is to drag yourself forwards with your hands, but you You could try to see what happens. So there might be more familiar ways of traveling, and maybe some less familiar ways. So staying a little bit longer with this upper-lower connection. Spine, head, tail is ongoing in between. And there's a sense of the hands working simultaneously or the feet and the legs working simultaneously. And depending on where you're at with your exploration, you might want to see what a little bounciness can bring. Oh. Kind of bunny hops. And if you don't feel like hopping, you can still carry the weight into the hands to feel the exchange from lower into upper, back into lower. Great. I'm not quite doing what I thought I was going to do, but it's fine. Coming back onto the ground, let's recuperate with a heel rock. Taking the energy out of the hands, releasing shoulders, finding a little rock through heels and lower into upper spine, into skull. And then take a moment to relax in this big X position. Actually, you're welcome to lie on your front if it's comfy there. If it's not so comfortable on your front, you're welcome on your back as well. You might want to have your hands underneath your head. You might not wish to have your legs externally rotated. It might put too much pressure on the joints. You can have them more in parallel. You're also welcome to bend one knee if that's more comfortable. But allow your starfish body to connect with the earth in the front here. Noticing the flow of breath. And visualizing these connections from the navel center through the spine, through the proximal joints of the shoulders and the hips, through into the limbs, into the hands and into the feet. And then from those 6 limbs, a journey back towards navel center. And then bring yourself onto your back surface. And now finding more of a symmetrical X position. So visualizing the length of spine. And visualizing from the whole of that spine, rightwards, into the right arm, right leg, right side of the chest, right side of the skull, the right eye, the right cheek, the right ear. And give the whole of your right side a colour. Let's explore this whole right side now. With something more simultaneous. So that the right arm and the right leg, and the right side of the spine, right shoulder and right hip can mobilize together. And that might mean sliding on the ground, it might mean lifting off the ground, it might mean flexing at the joints. A sense of activating everything on the right side. And so now, rather than just the upper body and the lower body, we're finding the whole side initiating. And the left side is passive, it's quite quiet. It's really much more about right side of spine, right shoulder blade, right side of pelvis, right hip socket, right shoulder socket. And this symmetry between the length of the upper arm and the length of the upper leg and the two bones of the lower leg and the lower arm and all the small bones of hands and feet, of hand and foot. So allowing this right side to go wherever, maybe it crosses the midline even. Maybe it condenses to get towards each other a little bit. With the underlying supportive head-tail connection to find that flexion that's available in the front or in the side. And then allow that whole colour to rest on the ground, that right side. And notice any sensations you feel. And then shifting your attention to your left side. And visualizing a colour, a different colour for your left side. Just go with your instinct, don't think too hard about it. Same thing as before, starting to mobilize the whole of the left side. Left fingers, left toes, left wrist and ankle, left lower limbs, the long two bones of lower leg and lower arm, into knee and elbow, into thigh bone, upper arm bone, left shoulder socket, left hip socket, left collarbone, left shoulder blade, left iliac crest, left side of the sacrum, left ilia, left side of the spine, left eyeball, left ear. So that whole left side can slide, can flex, can roll, can float. Don't leave any part of your left side out. It's It's all part of this exploration, imbued with this colour. And so seeing where this left side can go. And then allowing it to rest on the ground. And let's find a lateral condensing pattern. So I'm finding one side activating and then the other side activating. With a flexion of spine in the side space, elbow and knee moving towards each other and away. And make this a little smaller, it doesn't have to be a huge action. Elbow and knee do not need to touch. Sensing more this sense of one side active and the other side quiet. Switching the intention of one colour to the other colour. And then you can really exaggerate the flexion. So the other side comes off the ground and you can roll towards that more exaggerated flexion into a small ball. And then activate top side. So for me, it's my left side. Activating through the left, open the right. Condensing the left side, bringing the right with it. Condensing to expanding the right side into left side. And then this next time we'll roll all the way onto your fronts. And then opening onto it into a starfish shape again. And finding that same lateral condensing on your front surface. So finding head tail with this lateral flexion as you condense to one side. And then if you can, tuck your toe underneath you and press to crawl. You might find the opposite side also participating with a bit of a drag. See if you can crawl your way along the ground. And then you might even find yourself going backwards, very low to the ground. If you're not going anywhere, don't worry. And if you can, see what happens if you press through the toe. It's a pretty useful connection or information of foot to pelvis relationship. And maybe bring yourself onto all fours and explore some creeping body half style. So finding this simultaneity of the upper and lower on one side to take you backwards and forwards. How head tail and this flexion that we were doing really early on in the class comes back to help us. And then you can take it onto knees off the ground, and the same thing. So now spine is more stable as I travel. There's a lot less flexion going on through my spine as I kind of bear walk myself forward and backwards. I can feel the support of the proximal joints through into the limbs more differently here than I could when with my knees on the ground. So if I come back to all fours, I can find again more spine participating. Trying to stay in body half. And then coming back low to the ground. And then finding yourself in a big X position. Let's find a diagonal heel rock now of left heel, rocking a connection through to right scapula, right shoulder blade. And then let that go, allow the right heel to take over, sending a rock through to the left shoulder blade. So now we have a conversation traveling through the body from the left lower, the left limb, through spine into the right upper. And switching back and forth in your own time. Activating one cross-lateral connection and then the other. And then you might find that long diagonal activating, connecting to the opposite arm, simply condensing that diagonal towards and away. Peeling the head and the tail off the ground doesn't feel so appealing, or the head anyway. You can just take the elbow and the knee towards each other. Or if you'd like to join in with the skull, that's totally fine. And so now we can start to play with these cross-lateral connections in crawling. This time reaching with the hand, opposite knee comes forwards, hands and eyes see, reach the hand, and the opposite knee comes with you. Or taking the knee back and the hand replaces it, knee back, hand replaces. And slowing it down so you feel the reach of the hand, traveling through to tail to knee. And we can try it the other way from the knee first. So I was reaching us from the upper first, but we can take it knee into hand, opposite knee, opposite hand. So slightly different coordinations back and forth. You can try the first one again if you wish, hand reaching. And coming back, it could be knee then hand. Or you could go lower leading, so sort of knee into the hand. And this is more like what we have in walking with a step. And before your shins fall off, take a little break, come onto knees off the ground, and we'll find it in our more of a downward dog shape. Hand reaching, foot following of the opposite side, going for a little wander about the space, and eventually stepping through, bringing yourself to walking. And sensing how these mobilize you now in standing. Shifting from foot to walk. And let's go into a body half walk. Or a body half shuffle, you might go sideways. And then allow it to shift into this cross-lateral connection as you step. Sensing the underlying head-tail connection as you step. How lower body is more connected through to the ground. Upper body is free to go wherever. And how the information travels. Foot, pelvis, spine, shoulder girdle, head. And in the next 5 minutes or so, go back to the ground, start low. And find your way in and out of the ground in different ways. And notice for yourself what connections you're using. So we had core-distal, navel center to 6 limbs, everything moving at the same time, each limb equally active, equally important. We had head-tail connection, where the spine, the relationship of the head to the tail becomes very important. And we have the activation of the upper body and the lower body working with a sense of simultaneity or simultaneous reach of the arms or flexion of the limbs of the legs. And we had body half. One half initiating, the other one following. So finding different ways of shifting your weight to come onto 2 feet or into standing and walking. And then sending yourself back into the ground, noticing what patterns of connection you're using to get there. So being quite free with allowing either like the body to lead and your mind is sort of tracking, oh, upper leading, lower leading, ooh, core-distal. You can be quite prescriptive instructing yourself, or your body can lead and you can be naming it as you go. But what I'd like for you to do is to sense everything that you're doing has this underlying connectivity. And if you're not sure, then it's likely to be something like head-tail or core-distal. Many patterns overlapping always. And the more complex the movement, the more you have to sense as much as you can to try and track the changes. If you're not sure, don't worry. If it's becoming too heady, just enjoy moving, sensing your whole body is connected. As one part feeds into the next, into the next, into the next. Maybe the colours of the body half come back to support you. Maybe the colour of your jellyfish. Maybe some of these earlier movements of spine give you some catalyst to travel into. Maybe the fluidity of the bones comes back, or the buoyancy and the bounciness of some of these weight shifts. Noticing breath support. And then let's re-find ourselves back on the ground with a heel rock to check in with how that feels now. So these patterns of connection we worked with for mostly different ways of shifting weight and crawling, traveling. And maybe you can sense some of them still here in heel rock. And slow it down. Slowing it down even more. What's the smallest heel rock, the smoothest heel rock you can make? What is the least amount of movement possible here? And then let it go into passive weight. Bring your hands together, give them a little rub. And then gently roll yourself and push yourself to sit. And let's regather back at the computer for a quick chat and a check-in.